Hey everyone, this video was created using Notebook LM and Jog AI. While the avatars you'll see are AI generated, all the information comes straight from the Path to Freedom document put together by the Alberta Prosperity Project. Give it a listen, maybe even a couple of times, as it's packed with valuable insights. Let's dive in.
Imagine a region within a country that actually puts out a detailed public plan for financial independence.
Right.
And claiming it's over-contributing billions to the federal government. We're talking like $44 to $47 billion a year.
That's a huge number. And it sets up a fascinating question, doesn't it? What kind of future does that blueprint actually propose?
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today. This specific document, Alberta's Path to Freedom, a fiscal and economic plan.
And it's important to note, this isn't just some back-of-the-napkin calculation. Yeah. It's presented as a draft for public discussion.
Right, a fully costed fiscal plan. And they're pretty upfront about their methods, aren't they?
They are. They state the figures are approximate, give or take 10%. And they list their sources, Statistics Canada, provincial budgets, even talks with accounting firms. And crucially, they say they've used conservative estimates deliberately. They call it the low, least positive case for an independent Alberta.
Interesting framing. So our mission today is to really unpack the core arguments here. The financial claims, the economic vision.
Yeah, looking at that over-contribution claim, how they plan to replace federal services, the costs involved.
And also the bigger picture stuff, pensions, environment, indigenous relations, even immigration. It's quite comprehensive.
It really covers a lot of ground.
Okay, so let's start with that fundamental piece. The claim that Alberta over-contributes significantly to Ottawa. For you listening, this is basically about sending more tax money than you get back in federal spending and services.
Right, and it's often a point of friction in federal systems. This plan tries to put a hard number on it. They estimate Alberta's federal tax contributions for 2021 to 2024 were somewhere between $68 and $75 billion annually.
Wow, okay. How does that break down?
Well, according to the plan, the biggest chunk is personal income tax, PIT. That's roughly 46%.
Right.
Then you've got corporate income tax, CIT, at about 15%. GST and excise taxes are around 16%.
Got it.
And the rest, about 22%, comes from EI and CPP contributions.
So a huge amount going out. But the plan argues not much comes back.
That's the core of it. They estimate only $22 to $26 billion of that returns to Alberta via federal transfers.
Which leaves that net figure
of $44 to $47 billion per year. Over 4 years, they tally that up to about $185 billion.
And they link this directly to Alberta's economy.
Yes, specifically the oil and gas sector, contributing, they say, 87% of Canada's crude exports, 98% of natural gas exports. That, plus high per capita income, drives those federal tax numbers.
So the argument is, keep that money, and Alberta's fiscal picture changes dramatically.
Precisely. That retained revenue is the foundation for their entire fiscal case for independence.
Okay, that sets the stage for the revenue side. But then there's the big question. What would it cost to actually run an independent Alberta, taking over all those federal services?
Yeah, this is really where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Understanding the feasibility. How do you stand up a new government apparatus?
So what's the price tag they put on it?
The plan estimates the annual cost for replacing those services falls between $22.7 billion and $31.6 billion.
And what are the major components within that range?
Well, you've got national defense. They estimate $3 to $5 billion. Federal health programs, things currently funded federally, $8 to $10 billion.
Okay, those are big ones.
Definitely. Then employment insurance, $2 to $3 billion annually. Replacing CPP services, another $3 to $6 billion. And interestingly, indigenous services, they peg that at $4.2 to $5 billion. And they explicitly state this is an increased allocation compared to current federal spending, aimed at supporting sovereign indigenous communities within Alberta.
That's a notable detail. What about other things? Borders, policing?
Yep, they itemize those too. International relations embassies, diplomacy, $2.5 to $1 billion. Border and customs, $0.3 to $0.5 billion.
And policing, replacing the RCMP.
Estimated at $4.74 to $4.76 billion annually. And then there's a catch-all category for other minor federal services, about $1 to $1.3 billion.
So those are the yearly costs. But setting things up initially must cost something, too.
Good point. The plan accounts for that. They estimate one-time setup costs of $2.8 to $5.7 billion.
For things like?
Capital investments, basically. buying initial defense equipment, setting up embassies abroad, establishing new administrative bodies from scratch.
Right, the initial infrastructure. Okay, now let's shift focus a bit to something that impacts almost everyone directly: pensions. The plan proposes an Alberta pension plan, the APP.
Yes, and this is a really significant piece. It touches on retirement security, contribution rates, and it represents potentially huge fiscal capacity for an independent Alberta.
But it starts with a bit of a disagreement, doesn't it, about the assets transferred from the existing Canada pension plan?
A major one, actually. The document flags this debate prominently. Alberta's claim, which relies on a report by LifeWorks, is for a $334 billion asset transfer from the CPP.
Which is a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
But the CPP Investment Board, the CPPIB, has a much lower estimate, closer to $100 billion for Alberta's share.
So a big gap. How does this plan handle that uncertainty?
Well, consistent with their low least positive case approach, they don't use either extreme. They choose a midpoint for their calculations, assuming Alberta would receive $167 billion in 2026.
Okay, a conservative assumption then. So starting with that $167 billion, what do they project for the APP?
They assume a nominal 10% annual return on those assets. That would grow the base to about $183.7 billion by 2026.
And then you add ongoing contribution.
Right. They estimate those at $5 billion a year. So combine the investment returns and the contributions, and they project a total annual revenue for the APP of $23.4 billion.
How does that compare to the current situation?
Well, the plan argues it significantly exceeds current flows. Albertans currently contribute, they say, $9 to $11 billion to CPP annually and receive about $3 to $6 billion in benefits.
So the projected APP revenue is much higher than current contributions and payouts. What could that mean for Albertans?
It opens up possibilities, according to the plan. They suggest it could allow for lower contribution rates. They even float reducing the current 9.9% CPP base rate down to maybe 5.9%.
That's a big drop.
Or alternatively, they could enhance benefits for retirees or generate a surplus within the APP itself, which could potentially be used for other provincial priorities.
And what about the transition? Protecting current pensioners.
The plan explicitly states Alberta would guarantee pension security during the transition, even covering payments out of general surplus funds if the APP transfer was delayed or initially insufficient.
Okay, so we've looked at the revenue they hope to keep, the costs they expect to incur, and this potential pension plan surplus. What does the overall bottom line look like in this plan? The integrated financial picture.
This is where you see the scale of the projected fiscal capacity. The plan argues it could enable really significant tax cuts and investments, which they frame as direct benefits to citizens.
So let's see the numbers. Total revenue.
They project total annual revenue for an independent Alberta at $142.1 to $149.1 billion. That combines the retained federal taxes we discussed earlier with existing provincial revenues.
Okay, and total spending.
Total annual expenditures, that's current provincial spending, plus the estimated costs of replacing those federal services are projected at $98 to $106.9 billion.
So revenue minus expenditures leaves?
A projected annual fiscal surplus of $29.4 to $48.3 billion. That's before factoring in those one-time setup costs.
And even with the setup costs in year one?
Still a surplus, projected between $23.6 and $45.5 billion. And remember, this is separate from and in addition to any surplus generated within the proposed Alberta pension plan.
That's a very large potential surplus. What do they propose doing with it?
Primarily significant tax reductions. The plan outlines two scenarios based on the surplus range.
Okay, what's the first one? The low case.
Using the lower-end surplus figure, around $29 billion, they suggest eliminating the federal GST entirely within Alberta.
No GST?
And eliminating provincial personal income taxes and corporate income taxes.
Wow. All provincial income tax gone.
That's the proposal in this scenario. They estimate this could cut the average Albertan's total annual tax bill by 29%, dropping it from about $38,000 to $26,000.
Okay, that's scenario one. What about the high case, using the bigger surplus estimate?
With a higher surplus figure, around $47 billion, the proposal is even more dramatic. Eliminate all current federal personal and corporate income taxes collected in Alberta.
So no federal income tax either?
Correct. In this scenario, they project average personal taxes could fall by 46%, a reduction of about $18,000, bringing the average down to $20,000.
These are obviously huge potential changes. How do they propose ensuring fiscal discipline with such large surpluses and tax cuts?
Good question. The plan suggests embedding fiscal controls directly into a new Alberta constitution. Things like balanced budget requirements, strict debt limits, transparency rules,
What else?
spending oversight mechanisms like requiring a supermajority vote for spending increases, and even potentially requiring taxpayer approval for any new taxes. Less rules for managing resource revenue and mandating long-term fiscal planning.
So, trying to lock in fiscal responsibility constitutionally.
That seems to be the idea presented.
Now, this plan isn't just spreadsheets and budget lines, is it? It also touches on broader policy areas that would define an independent Alberta.
Absolutely. It goes beyond the core financials to sketch out a wider vision: environmental policy, Indigenous relations, immigration. It shows they're thinking about the whole structure of a potential new nation.
Let's look at the environment first. What's the approach there?
It focuses heavily on leveraging Alberta's natural landscapes for carbon sequestration. They list vast areas: 12.1 million hectares of grasslands, 5 to 6.6 million hectares of foothills, 6.6 to 7.9 million hectares of mountain forests.
Huge areas. And the idea is to use them how?
Through practices like rotational grazing on grasslands, reforestation efforts, and protecting peatlands, which are significant carbon sinks.
And they quantify the potential impact.
They estimate a total sequestration potential of 10 to 33 million tons of carbon per year. That translates to roughly 37 to 122 million tons of CO2 equivalent annually.
How significant is that compared to emissions?
The plan suggests this could potentially offset up to 46% of Alberta's current emissions. And the emphasis is on achieving this based on local priorities, not necessarily external climate agreements or mandates.
Interesting. Okay, what about relations with Indigenous peoples? You mentioned an increased funding allocation earlier.
Yes, the policy proposals go further. The plan talks about constitutionalizing the inalienable ownership of existing reserve lands, about 1.6 million hectares.
Okay.
And then, crucially, allocating an additional 1.6 million hectares of current Crown land to Indigenous nations, and importantly, including subsurface resource rights with that land.
Subsurface rights are key for resource revenue.
Exactly. The plan envisions economic self-sufficiency for Indigenous nations, partly through 100% ownership of resource revenues generated from their lands. They estimate this could mean an extra $1 to $2 billion annually for those nations. And
beyond economics.
It also proposes Indigenous-led systems for health, housing, education, and community safety, funded by that $4.2 to $5 billion annual allocation we mentioned, and integrating these efforts with the broader environmental strategy.
Right. Now, immigration, that's always a complex topic. What's the plan's approach?
It proposes a points-based system, explicitly modeled after Canada's 2005 Federal Skilled Worker Program.
So, criteria-like.
Education, language ability, specifically English, is mentioned work experience. It also notes a strong preference would be given to Canadian citizens from other provinces who wish to move to Alberta.
What about people already in Alberta on temporary status or as permanent residents?
The plan outlines a reapplication process for them under the new Alberta system. They estimate this would affect somewhere between 150,000 and 190,000 people currently holding Canadian work permits or PR status in Alberta.
Okay. And there's a specific policy on deportation mentioned.
Yes, quite a stark one. Automatic deportation for any non-citizen convicted of any criminal offense that results in a jail sentence, regardless of how short the sentence is.
Regardless of sentence length.
That's what the document states. It also asserts that Canada would be obligated to accept back or deport elsewhere any individuals deemed ineligible to stay under Alberta's new immigration rules.
Okay. So that covers the core plan, the low, least positive case. But you mentioned there's another layer, a more ambitious vision.
That's right. Towards the end, the document shifts gears and presents what it calls a potential great economic future, moving beyond those initial conservative estimates. It's much more speculative, based on different policy choices and assumptions.
An aggressive growth scenario?
Very much so. It's aimed quite explicitly at positioning an independent Alberta as potentially one of the lowest taxed and least regulated jurisdictions globally, drawing comparisons to places like Dubai or Monaco.
So what does that look like in terms of projections?
Well, it envisions dramatic increases in resource production. Oil output potentially rising from 3.8 million barrels per day in 2023 to 9.5 million by 2045.
Wow, more than double.
And natural gas production almost doubling too, from 11 billion cubic feet per day to 21 billion over the same period.
The revenue implications would be massive.
Huge. Direct oil and gas revenue is projected to climb from around $144 billion in 2025 to maybe $334 billion by 2045. And when they factor in assumed cost savings from deregulation and economic multipliers, the total cumulative economic impact between 2025 and 2045 is projected at something like $8.2 trillion. Trillion, with potentially 300,000 to 450,000 new jobs created.
Okay, that's the growth projection. What policy changes drive this vision, particularly on taxes?
But tax changes are transformative in this scenario. It proposes the complete elimination of personal income tax.
We saw that in the high case earlier, but this makes it central.
Yes. Saving households, they estimate, around $14,000 annually on average. Corporate income tax would be reduced to a flat 10%. And they'd introduce a new 5% Alberta sales tax, or AST.
So income tax is gone, replaced partly by a sales tax. What about property taxes?
A radical change proposed there, too. Replacing traditional property taxes, which are based on assessed value, with a flat fee based on a property's street frontage and its total land area in hectares.
How would that work for municipal funding?
The plan suggests the provincial government would provide grants to municipalities, estimated at $5 to $6 billion annually, to cover any shortfalls resulting from this property tax shift.
And are there specific citizen-focused policies in this growth scenario?
Yes. Several are highlighted. Reducing post-secondary tuition fees dramatically, down to $1,750 per year.
That's very low.
And providing free pharmacare and dental coverage for specific groups, children, low-income households, and retirees, potentially covering around 1.5 million people.
And the Heritage Fund, Alberta's sovereign wealth fund.
A major focus in this growth vision. The plan projects it could grow to $1.3 or $1.4 trillion by 2045.
Trillion again.
Yes, generating potentially $52 to $56 billion in investment income annually by that point, intended to provide long-term fiscal stability.
So quite a different picture from the initial conservative case.
A vastly different scale of ambition and transformation, yes.
Okay, so we've journeyed through this whole document, Alberta's Path to Freedom. We started with that core claim of a significant overcontribution.
Around $47 billion a year.
Explored the estimated costs to replace federal services, the mechanics of a proposed Alberta pension plan.
Including that contentious asset transfer debate, and the potential for lower contributions or higher benefits.
We looked at the projected surpluses, even in the conservative case, and the potential for really substantial tax cuts.
Eliminating GST, provincial income taxes, maybe even federal income taxes collected there.
And then we touched on the broader policy visions for the environment, using natural sequestration for Indigenous economic self-sufficiency and land ownership, the points-based immigration system with strict deportation rules.
And finally, that highly ambitious, aggressive growth scenario aiming for massive resource expansion, minimal taxes, and $1 trillion heritage fund.
It's certainly a detailed, fact-based argument they're presenting for the potential of an independent Alberta, grounded in their interpretation of the numbers.
It lays out a very specific path, built on a distinct set of assumptions and calculations.
So for you listening, what really stands out from this deep dive into the plan? Does this detailed fiscal and economic blueprint provoke new questions for you about what economic or political independence could look like, how a new nation might fund itself, or shape its own destiny based on its specific resources?